days there is an irony in the way that the conversation about goth has shifted.
I had already planned on responding to this video, but it was just going to be a minor correcting video regarding the history of goth and where it actually came from. As somebody who is alternative myself, and a major history nerd, I find the evolution of how goth went from a random barbarian tribe that lived on the outskirts of the Roman Empire to what it is today very fascinating and complex. But instead, this chick got really pissed off at me and made several videos responding to my comments because I corrected a very common misconception that she repeated in her video.
Ah, yes, the Romans! Known for their post-punk vinyl collections and dark wave club nights, right?
Not even remotely close to what I was arguing. And nowhere in that comment did I say anything about the Goths being Romans. They're the reason the Roman Empire fell, because they sacked the city of Rome. This is why, by the Renaissance, people started using the term Gothic to describe post-Roman architecture in a derogatory manner. You see, during the Renaissance, there was a lot of nostalgia for ancient Rome and how everything was considered grandiose. They had all these divine palaces and colosseums, and after the Roman Empire collapsed, we had castles and cathedrals, and they were ugly. So, many in the Renaissance started using the term Gothic to describe this type of architecture. While at the same time Gothic was becoming used as a derogatory term for post-Roman architecture, you also had the Protestant Reformation, which produced a lot of literature critiquing the Catholic Church, such as Paradise Lost and Dante's Inferno. And while this today is not what we would associate with modern goth culture, it would go on to influence the Gothic literature movement, which started in the early 1800s and lasted all the way up to the turn of the 20th century. This is where we get Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Bram Stoker's Dracula, as well as Edgar Allan Poe. The setting of many of these books and poems took place in Gothic cathedrals, in monasteries, and castles. Many of these poems and books would continue the tradition of critiquing the Catholic Church. Though it should also be noted that both Mary Shelley and Bram Stoker were devoutly Christian despite their critiques of the church. There's also a possibility that Edgar Allan Poe himself was devoutly Episcopalian, but there's not really much known about his religious beliefs, and he didn't really discuss them all that much in his books. But eventually, people started calling this era of horror literature the Gothic literature movement because of the settings in which they took place. And eventually, by the time of Old Hollywood, many of these books would be adapted to the silver screen, which would establish our modern perception of Gothic aesthetics. Aesthetics that you yourself continue to use. It doesn't exactly take a genius to see the similarities between traditional Gothic horror divas from the Silver Age of Hollywood and compare them to modern Gothic aesthetics and see that they are damn near identical in every conceivable facet. Even if we look at your TikTok showcase, you are promoting material that is heavily steeped in Gothic horror tradition. However, Gothic culture did not become mainstream until the 1970s with the rise in popularity of Gothic music, particularly with punk and metal bands like Black Sabbath, which, by the way, got their name from a classic Boris Karloff movie. Again, I was not trying to attack you. I was trying to make a minor correction about a common misconception. But hey, it's like you said.
About the roots of goth, the music, the community, the subversion, the history. And some people get defensive.
You most certainly did. I bet you're one of those poser goth chicks online who complains all the time because there's always blue-collar men who like to flirt with goth chicks. Gee, I wonder if there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for that. You know, I've never seen Crowbar before, though I am going to get to see Acid Bath later this year in November. You sit here talking about how Gothic and goth are not the same thing, when essentially they are in the modern sense. Goth today is an abbreviation of the word Gothic. Gothic was an adjective loosely inspired by the Goths that sacked the ancient city of Rome. Sure, the Goths that sacked ancient Rome a long time ago are completely different to the modern goth culture and aesthetic. But modern goth culture, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, is rooted in traditional Gothic horror and literature. The aesthetic comes from when those Gothic literature books and literary works were adapted for the silver screen in classic Hollywood. And the Gothic music that brought Gothic culture mainstream was heavily influenced and inspired by the Gothic films of the 1930s and 40s. I don't know why you felt the need to get so defensive just because I made a minor correction over a small misconception that is still popular. I'm starting to get really tired of posers who dress up and cosplay and think that they get to keep the community from people who have been goth their entire lives and know more about the subculture than they do. Just because I'm not dressing the part 100% of the time does not mean I'm any less part of this culture. If you truly had an appreciation for gothic music, you would actually study what influenced and inspired it. One of my favorite parts about goth culture is just how fascinating our history actually is. And it goes much deeper than the music of the 1970s that popularized it. As far as I'm concerned, you're not a real goth unless you can tell me how Mary Shelley lost her virginity. And if you don't know, you're probably offended by that. And if you do know, then you know why Mary Shelley is the only true queen of the goths.